The clock ticked past midnight. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. Midnight was a time when most people were safely tucked away in their homes, but not Danny. He had a job to do, and tonight, it was a delivery to the infamous Blackwood Manor. Rain lashed the pizzeria windows, creating a rhythmic yet unsettling soundtrack to the night. The storm had been raging for hours, and it showed no signs of letting up. Danny pulled his hood tighter around his face, trying to shield himself from the relentless downpour. Chibi Danny shivered, clutching a pizza box. The warmth from the box was a small comfort against the cold, but it did little to ease his growing anxiety. He had made countless deliveries before, but this one felt different. The stories about Blackwood Manor were enough to make anyone uneasy. A delivery to Blackwood Manor, the name alone sent shivers down his spine. It was a place shrouded in mystery and fear, a place where the line between reality and the supernatural seemed to blur. Danny had heard the tales, but he had always dismissed them as just that, tales. He'd heard the rumors, haunted, people vanished, nonsense, he hoped. But as he approached the manor, the weight of those stories pressed down on him. Each step felt heavier than the last, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist in the corners of his vision. Blackwood Manor loomed, a silhouette against the stormy sky. The mansion stood tall and foreboding, its darkened windows like eyes watching his every move. The storm clouds above seemed to gather directly over the manor, casting it in an even more ominous light. A gargoyle leered from the gate. Danny swallowed his fear. The stone creature's eyes seemed to follow him as he approached, its menacing grin a silent warning. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had a job to do, and he couldn't let fear get the better of him. He rang the bell. Silence. He rang again. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The only sound was the relentless pounding of the rain. Just as he was about to turn away, thinking no one would answer, he heard it. A faint creak from within the manor. A creak. The door inched open. The sound was almost deafening in the silence of the night. Danny's heart raced as he watched the door slowly reveal the darkness inside. He strained his eyes, trying to see who or what was behind it. A blood-stained hand reached out. The sight was enough to freeze him in place. The hand was pale and ghostly, with dark crimson stains that stood out starkly against the white skin. It reached out slowly, almost as if it were beckoning him to come closer. Danny's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to scream, to run, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. The stories he had heard flashed through his mind, each one more terrifying than the last. Was this really happening? Was he about to become another one of those stories? He wanted to run. He had to deliver the pizza. The rational part of his mind told him to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But another part, the part that took pride in his work, urged him to complete the delivery. He had come this far. He couldn't turn back now. He stumbled back, dropping the box. The pizza hit the ground with a soft thud, the box opening slightly to reveal its contents. Danny's eyes were locked on the hand, which had now retreated slightly, as if waiting for him to make the next move. A chilling cackle echoed from inside. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard. Cold, cruel, and filled with malice. It sent a shiver down his spine, and he knew he couldn't stay any longer. Whatever was inside that manor, it wasn't something he wanted to meet. Danny didn't wait to see more. He turned and ran, his feet pounding against the wet pavement. The rain seemed to intensify, as if the storm itself was trying to drive him away. He didn't look back, not even once. All he could think about was getting as far away from Blackwood Manor as possible. As he ran, he could still hear the echo of that cackle in his ears, a haunting reminder of the night's events. He didn't know what he had just encountered, and he wasn't sure he wanted to find out. All he knew was that he had narrowly escaped something truly terrifying. When he finally reached the safety of the pizzeria, he was drenched and out of breath. His co-workers looked at him with concern, but he couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. He simply shook his head and sat down, trying to process the night's events. The stories about Blackwood Manor were no longer just tales to him. They were real, and he had the chilling experience to prove it. Danny knew he would never forget this night, and he silently vowed never to return to that cursed place again. The clock ticked past midnight once more, but this time, Danny was safe inside, away from the horrors of Blackwood Manor. The rain continued to fall, but it was just a background noise now, a reminder of a night he would never forget. Chibi Lily skipped along, humming, another pizza delivery. It was a chilly evening and the sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. The air was crisp and the leaves rustled softly in the gentle breeze. Lily, a cheerful and diligent delivery girl, was on her last delivery of the night. She loved her job, especially the part where she got to explore different parts of the town. Tonight, her destination was a place she had never been before, Harbinger Lane. 13 Harbinger Lane. The house stood alone, shrouded in mist. It was an old Victorian-style house with tall, narrow windows and a steeply pitched roof. The paint was peeling and the garden was overgrown with weeds. The house had an eerie aura as if it had been abandoned for years, yet there was a light on in one of the windows, flickering like a candle. Lily felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached the front gate. The air grew cold. Lily shivered. She pulled her jacket tighter around her and took a deep breath. The mist seemed to thicken as she walked up the path, and the shadows grew longer and darker. She could hear the distant hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the wind. The atmosphere was heavy with an unsettling silence, broken only by the sound of her footsteps on the gravel. She knocked. A raspy voice answered. "Leave it on the step!" The voice sent a chill down her spine. It was low and gravelly, as if the person on the other side of the door had not spoken in years. Lily hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorbell. She glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching her from the shadows. But there was no one. She placed the pizza box on the step, as instructed. The pizza felt strangely warm in her hands, warmer than usual. It was almost as if it was radiating heat. She could feel the warmth seeping through her gloves, and it made her uneasy. She had delivered countless pizzas before, but this one felt different. There was something off about it, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Lily glanced at the address. 113 Harbinger Lane. She'd misheard. She double-checked the slip of paper in her pocket. Yes, this was the right address. But why did it feel so wrong? She looked up at the house again, and for a moment she thought she saw a shadow move behind one of the windows. She blinked, and it was gone. She shook her head, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. As she turned to leave, the door creaked open again. The sound was loud in the silence, and it made her jump. She turned back, her heart pounding in her chest. The door was ajar, and she could see a sliver of darkness beyond it. She took a step back, her instincts telling her to run, but curiosity got the better of her. She took a hesitant step forward, peering into the darkness. A figure stood in the shadows, eyes glowing red. The figure was tall and thin, with long, bony fingers that seemed to reach out towards her. The eyes were the most unsettling part, glowing a deep, menacing red. They seemed to bore into her soul, and she felt a wave of fear wash over her. She wanted to run, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. The figure took a step forward, and she could see its face, pale and gaunt, with hollow cheeks and a twisted smile. A clawed hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Join us!" the raspy voice whispered. The grip was strong, and she could feel the sharp claws digging into her skin. She tried to pull away, but the figure's grip was like iron. The voice was close now, right in her ear, and she could feel its cold breath on her neck. "Join us," it repeated. And she felt a wave of terror wash over her. She struggled, trying to break free, but the figure's grip only tightened. Lily screamed. She struggled, kicking and wriggling free. She managed to pull her wrist free from the figure's grasp, and she stumbled back, her heart racing. She turned and ran, her feet pounding on the gravel path. She could hear the figure behind her, its footsteps echoing in the silence. She didn't dare look back. Her only thought was to get away, to escape the nightmare that had suddenly become her reality. The pizza box fell, splattering its cheesy contents on the ground. Lily didn't look back. She ran as fast as she could, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She could still feel the figure's eyes on her, watching her as she fled. She didn't stop until she was back on the main road, the lights of the town in sight. She slowed down, her heart still pounding, and looked back. The house on Harbinger Lane was shrouded in mist, as if nothing had happened. But Lily knew she would never forget the terror she had felt that night. Chibi Marco yawned. One last delivery. It had been a long day filled with countless deliveries, each one more exhausting than the last. Marco's feet ached and his eyes felt heavy. He glanced at the clock on his phone. It was well past midnight. "Just one more," he muttered to himself, trying to muster the energy to get through it. The address was scribbled hastily on a piece of paper, and he could barely make out the writing in the dim light of the street lamp. He sighed deeply, hoping this last delivery would be quick and uneventful. The address led him to a graveyard. Marco's heart skipped a beat as he approached the iron gates. They creaked open with an eerie sound, sending shivers down his spine. This can't be right, he thought, double-checking the address. But there it was, clear as day, leading him into the heart of the graveyard. The wind howled through the trees and the leaves rustled ominously. Marco hesitated for a moment, contemplating whether to turn back, but his sense of duty pushed him forward. After all, a delivery was a delivery, no matter how strange the location. He checked the slip again, no mistake. The address was correct, and there was no turning back now. He took a deep breath and stepped further into the graveyard. The tombstones stood like silent sentinels, watching his every move. Marco's footsteps echoed in the stillness, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He clutched the pizza box tightly, as if it were a shield against the unknown. A full moon cast eerie shadows on the tombstones. The pale light illuminated the names and dates etched into the stone, some of them so old they were barely legible. Marco's imagination began to run wild, conjuring up images of ghosts and ghouls lurking in the darkness. He shook his head, trying to dispel the thoughts. "It's just a graveyard," he told himself. "Nothing to be afraid of." But the eerie atmosphere was hard to ignore, and his nerves were on edge. He approached a mausoleum, its door slightly ajar. The structure was old and weathered, with ivy creeping up its sides. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a dark interior. Marco hesitated at the threshold, peering into the gloom. "Hello?" he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no response, only the echo of his own voice bouncing back at him. He took a tentative step inside, the pizza box held out in front of him like an offering. "Pizza delivery!" Marco called out, his voice trembling. The words seemed to hang in the air, unanswered. He took another step forward, his eyes straining to see in the dim light. The air inside the mausoleum was cold and damp, and it smelled of earth and decay. Marco's heart pounded in his chest, and he could feel the sweat starting to form on his forehead. He glanced around, looking for any sign of life, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence and the shadows that seemed to move on their own. Silence. He peered inside. The darkness seemed to swallow the light from his phone, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Marco's mind raced with possibilities. Who would order a pizza to a place like this, and why? He took another step, his footfalls echoing off the stone walls. The silence was deafening, and every creak and groan of the old building made him jump. He felt a chill run down his spine, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. Candles flickered, illuminating a table set for one. The soft glow of the candles cast long shadows on the walls, creating an eerie, almost surreal atmosphere. The table was small and simple, with a single chair pulled up to it. Marco's eyes were drawn to the centerpiece, a single slice of pizza on a plate. It looked out of place, almost comical in the otherwise somber setting. He took a step closer, his curiosity piqued. Who would go to such lengths for a slice of pizza? A single slice of pizza lay on a plate. It looked fresh, the cheese still melted and gooey. Marco's stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since his shift started. But the sight of the pizza in such a strange place made him uneasy. He reached out to touch the plate, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage, but it was solid, real. He pulled his hand back, unsure of what to do next. The silence was oppressive, and he felt a growing sense of dread. And then he saw it, a movement, out of the corner of his eye. He turned, his heart leaping into his throat. There, emerging from the shadows, was a figure. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if it had all the time in the world. Marco's breath caught in his chest as he took in the sight. The figure was tall and gaunt, its skin a sickly green. It looked like something out of a nightmare, and Marco felt a wave of terror wash over him. A monstrous hand, green and rotting, reached for the pizza. The fingers were long and bony, the nails cracked and yellowed. Marco watched in horror as the hand closed around the slice, lifting it to a mouth filled with decaying teeth. The creature took a bite, and Marco could hear the sickening sound of the cheese stretching and tearing. He wanted to scream, to run, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. He could only watch in stunned silence as the creature devoured the pizza. It took a bite, cheese stretching from its decaying teeth. Marco gasped, the sound finally breaking the spell that held him in place. He stumbled backward, his mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But the creature was all too real, and it was looking at him now, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Marco's heart pounded in his chest, and he knew he had to get out of there. The figure turned, revealing a horrifying pizza-craving zombie. Its eyes were sunken and hollow, its skin stretched tight over its bones. It looked at Marco with a hunger that went beyond mere food. Marco felt a surge of panic, his fight-or-flight response kicking in. He turned on his heel and bolted for the door, the pizza box forgotten in his haste. He could hear the creature behind him, its footsteps slow and deliberate, but he didn't dare look back. Marco ran faster than he ever had before. His feet pounded the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The graveyard seemed to stretch on forever, the tombstones blurring as he sprinted past. He could hear the creature's growls growing fainter, but he didn't slow down. He burst through the iron gates and didn't stop running until he was back in the safety of his car. He slammed the door shut and locked it, his hands shaking. He took a moment to catch his breath, his mind reeling from the night's events. "Never again," he vowed, starting the engine and speeding away. "No more late-night deliveries."